Thank you very much for coming this morning. Appreciate everybody doing the elbow shake. We're going to be practicing social distancing, I guess, which in my family is actually called Thanksgiving, so we're pretty comfortable with this as it is. My name is Peter Loge. I'm the director of the Project on Ethics and Political Communication and an associate professor here in the School of Media and Public Affairs. Peter Wenner, conservative columnist and speechwriter for both Presidents Bush and President Reagan, wrote that democracy requires we honor the culture of words. It's in that spirit that we started the Project on Ethics and Political Communication just over a year ago to promote the study, teaching, and practice of political communication ethics. I hate the phrase now more than ever because inevitably you hear it shortly after I say it, which is shortly after I think it, which is after I've been practicing this in my head on the walk-in. So making it either always just recently more than ever, or it's now more than ever, oh my God, now more than ever, oh my God, now more than ever. And I'm just not ready to go down that spiral of despair quite this early. But that said, there does seem to be a bit of a pressing need for a conversation about how we talk about politics, how we talk about the policies we're engaging in, and how we teach it. Any of you who are studying journalism or who have studied journalism, business, law, public relations, any number of other fields have had to take courses in ethics. There are entire structures of textbooks and journals and conferences on applied ethics in a range of fields except political communication. About a dozen schools now offer degrees in political communication, including the School of Media and Public Affairs. We were the first. Increasing more schools offer minors, graduate degrees, certificates. Almost everybody offers classes in things like digital advocacy, political advertising, political speech writing. Yet there are precious few courses in political communication ethics. And GW offers one of the only, if not the only, class for undergraduates on that topic. There are 2 existing textbooks on political communication ethics, both edited by a guy named Professor Robert Denton, very smart, very good guy, the most recent of which was published in 2000. One of the sort of standard textbooks in political communication, Denton and a range of others, edit every year. I think it's in the 9th edition. This past, most recent edition that was released last summer was the first to include a chapter on ethics. So, the Project on Ethics and Political Communication is trying to do for Polycom what others have done for journalism, business, law, and a host of other fields. And I think we've done pretty good so far. In the first 18 months or so, I've given public talks and lectures at more than a half a dozen universities. I've spoken to 2 groups of high school students, 2 groups of high school teachers, spoken to national and local professional communications organizations in Austin, in Atlanta, in Florida, here in DC, spoken to a bipartisan consulting firm, brought me in to talk about ethics. We've written for The Hill, for Campaigns and Elections, have a piece coming out in a forthcoming issue of the online journal Media Ethics, talked to radio, podcast, print, and as you can see from the shameless promotion in front of you, this summer there's a book coming out called Political Communication Ethics, Theory and Practice from Romney and Littlefield. As far as I know, this will be the only book of its kind. Half the chapters are from academics writing about what one ought do, including one by Professor David Frank, who's with us this morning, and half are from a range of friends and colleagues who work in political communication, one by co-authored by Izzy Klein, who's here. Izzy runs one of the 2 people who runs the bipartisan lobbying firm Klein Johnson, and he wrote the chapter on lobbying with his partner, Matt Johnson. This will be ready this summer. It's mostly a textbook, so some of you who haven't taken my ethics class can expect to see it soon. The rest of you might actually find it interesting, even if you're not a student. So hopefully we're going to be able to just make this kind of a thing, make political communication ethics a thing. Before getting into this morning's conversation, I do have to have a couple of thank yous. Events like this, projects like this don't happen just by dumb luck. There's a lot of dumb luck involved with a lot of hard work and a lot of people, including Frank Sesno, my boss, the director of the School of Media and Public Affairs, his unwavering support from the jump, along with all of my colleagues in SMPA, some of whom are here. I know others may be watching and popping in and popping out. I need to thank the crew that putting on this morning's program. So Sarah in the back, Jen, Doug, and their teams who've been doing just fantastic work. I also have to thank the SMPA students in political communication ethics over the past couple of years, and even before, who've put up with basically the rough draft of this book and this concept, including Blake, who's sitting in the back. He's fresh off the Buttigieg campaign, Tennessee State Director. He actually did most of the social media and everything else for the project when he was still a student here. So thanks very much, Blake. And of course, Connor Kilgore, who's in the back. Connor's working with me on the project. He's also a full-time intern at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on their digital media team. He's an elected Republican state party official in the state of New Hampshire, and between all of that, he fits in being a junior here in SMPA. So the final thanks has to go to the Democracy Fund, who's generously give us a bit of a startup grant. Chris from the Democracy Fund had to cancel at the last minute, but if you run into Chris Crawford or anyone from the Democracy Fund, thank them for the bacon. They're the ones who paid for it. So with that, what I want to do is have a bit we've also done a bunch of stuff online. So this conversation is a continuation of what we've done online with a series of 5 questions where we ask political communication professionals, professors, students, and others the same 5 questions about ethics. We've had online chats, 2 of them so far, one with the head of the College Republicans and College Dems here at GW. They share an office, which I think is pretty cool. And the other was with Sarah Isger and Mo Elethy. Sarah is now an adjunct here. She was the public affairs director for Attorney General Sessions. She's a former Republican operative. Mo is former communications director for the Democratic National Committee and now runs the Institute of Politics at Georgetown. We hope to do more of these things. We just want to have more people talking about more ethics. So in that spirit, 3 people have very graciously volunteered to come up. As I invite you to come up and join us, and please come up when I invite you to come up and join us. And I'll introduce you as you sit. So I'm going to be here, and you, David, are, I guess, there. Lindsay, you're there, and Vinca here. So please, I'm going to do brief intros, and we're going to get into a bit of it, then we're going to have a conversation, kick stuff around between the 4 of us, open it up to audience questions, and then anybody watching online. If you're following us on, if you're watching the live stream, you can submit questions to the Facebook page. Is that right, Connor? Not? Yes, excellent. And he may run up and hand me pieces of paper for good questions to ask. So I've just pulled all of these off of your website, so I'm going to assume that everything you wrote about yourself is more or less accurate, or if not accurate, at least flattering. Lindsay is Redpath writing, speechwriter for Sarah Palin in 2008, director of speechwriting for the Romney-Ryan campaign in 2012. And I want to make sure I have the math right. You finished your doctorate at the University of Maryland in 2013.
Yes.
So you were working on your doctorate while you were the director of speechwriting on a presidential campaign?
Yes.
Holy cats.
Well, it helped that we lost. I had a little
It's equally time-consuming. I actually finished a book between the end of the Obama administration and starting teaching here, so I kind of get that. Next I heard is Professor David Frank. He's a professor of rhetoric at Clark Honors College at the University of Oregon. He's won tons of awards for teaching and research, author of a half a dozen books, dozens of peer-reviewed articles, and had a piece, and it was at Slate yesterday on Biden and Biden's speechwriting and Biden's speeches. And he also has a chapter in the forthcoming book that I'm going to continue to plug. It's available for pre-order on Amazon. Hopefully Roman and Littlefield is watching. I am plugging your book as you asked me to. But it's on the ethics of speechwriting. And immediately to my right is Vinca LaFleur, managing partner of West Wing Writers. According to your website, you can't tell us who your clients are?
That's right.
That's right. They're very impressive clients, so far as we know. You're the speechwriter in the Clinton White House, member of the Council on Foreign Relations. You've written for the Washington Post, the Boston Globe, and Elle, and also worked with Senator Kamala Harris on her book, and you worked with Mr. Ryan on his book. Mm-hmm. So a distinguished group of professional speechwriters and advocates, and somebody who studies speechwriting and advocacy. So the first question that I would actually, I'm going to start with the speechwriters and ask you to come in last on this one, David, is what is a speechwriter's job?
Shall I go first?
Yes, you go first.
Well, this is going to seem a little bit like a shameless plug, because I'm going to share the mission statement of my company, but actually I say it because I do think that this is what speechwriting is at its best can be. So at West Wing Writers, we say that what we're doing, or what we're trying to do, is to help good ideas get heard, good organizations make meaningful change, and good people make a difference in the world. Okay. And I think that at its best, that's what a speechwriter is trying to do. I think in the public opinion, folks have different ideas of what a speechwriter is actually doing, and they range from the speechwriter is basically just someone taking dictation, to the speechwriter is actually this sort of, nefarious person behind the scenes pulling the string like a puppeteer, and that there's something sort of, sinister about it almost, or that you should have skepticism about. But I really think that at its best, and when it's practiced at its best, it's an incredibly collaborative effort as I say, to try to get good ideas out into the world. And I think as a speechwriter, that's what makes the job fulfilling.
What do you think? Does that sound about right?
Yeah, I think it does. I think, you know, the way I think about speechwriting is kind of on two parallel tracks, right? There's the kind of nitty-gritty of the day-to-day, and then there's kind of the idea, right? The broader, kind of more noble idea about what it is you're doing. And I think on the broader, more noble idea level, that's exactly right. You know, I always talk about with clients that, you know, speechwriting is really a contribution to a conversation, right? There's this kind of national conversation that we're having. It's all kind of this part of the democratic process. It started before we got here. It's going to keep going after we go, after we leave. And we just want to make sure that our contributions to that conversation are good and advance the dialogue and get us closer to that more perfect union, right? And I think speechwriters have an incredibly important role to play in that. But then there's the day-to-day. And the day-to-day is, you know, I think young speechwriters, we were just talking about this in the green room, where you know, the more you get into it and the better you get at it, the less it's all about writing. You know, if you really are good and you really, you know, kind of rise to higher levels within the profession, only really about 25% of your job is original writing, right? About 25% or maybe 30% of your job is being a really good editor. And you know, 25% is being a really good advocate. So you are fighting for all of the lines in the speech that you think are really important and make the point, or you're fighting for ethical considerations. And about 25% is half therapist, diplomat, peacemaker. You know, it's a people business. You know, you have to be able to connect with people. You have to be willing to you know, to ask tough questions and ask personal questions. And so you really have to be able to establish a rapport with people. And a lot of times you have to call them competing factions. This is particularly true in the waning days of a campaign when everybody's really tired and not at their best. And speechwriters kind of, everything flows into speechwriting in an organization, right? Policy, legal, you know, comms, messaging, strategy, all of those things flow in. And so the speechwriter really in a lot of ways becomes kind of the convener of all of the best aspects of the campaign and the principle.
So this all sounds familiar, but you know, as a rhetorical scholar, we know that the history of speechwriting goes back more than 2,000 years, and the criticism of goes it back that at least that far, right? You have Plato made a good living beating up on the sophists, who claimed that good argument is what advanced things. Socrates compared speechwriters to just mere cooks or mere chefs. Quintilian complained about hack advocates. Mid-20th century conservative American public intellectual Richard Weaver, on the other hand, argued that that rhetoric is truth plus its artful presentation, and the role of speechwriting was to actually elevate men's souls. As a rhetorical scholar, what do you think? What is the job of a speechwriter, and does this make sense?
As an academic and a professor in the field, my job is to argue with speechwriters and to, in the comfort of my office, drinking coffee, looking at the speeches that you write, sharing them with students and identifying what you're doing wrong and what I believe is unethical. And then I share my understanding with students and then invite them to disagree with me, because my goal is to stimulate, as you are here, Peter, argumentation, debate, and civil disagreement about the arguments that speechwriters offer to their clients, and then their clients present to a public. Because the tie between what you two write and what your clients present can lead to severe consequences to our community. And so I can disagree in my classroom with a speech that you may have written for Sarah Palin or one that you may have written for Barack Obama. I will do so with some sensitivity to the context in which you were operating, because you're working for a client. You are not telling the president or Sarah Palin what they ought to say, you are suggesting it. And Peter has some good insights too in his writing, because he's suggesting that before speeches are written, there should be a period in which argumentation takes place, civil disagreement, so that the person that the two of you are writing for that has an opportunity to hear competing perspectives on the argument that the the person giving the speech is presenting.
So is that the part of your job? Do you think part of the job of the speechwriter is to encourage a good debate? I mean, ideally, a good speechwriter knows what a good argument looks like. You know, it's compelling, where the pitfalls are, maybe counter arguments that somebody else might not have seen. Is it up to the speechwriter to make sure that a good argument is made for the best policy? Is that part of your job, or do you just listen to what the best policy is and turn it into good words?
I think if you're in any environment in which speechwriting happens, we've never had an issue with a good debate. As a matter of fact, competing perspectives, sometimes you wish there were fewer as you're going through the draft. And again, I think it depends on the context in which you're writing. There are certainly environments where you are writing for a principal and there either isn't a lot of staff around or, for various reasons. And in the book, I'm sure this was the case when you did the book as well, when a principal does a book and they're holding public office, you're often walled off from a lot of the people that they typically consult with on public policy matters. And so it's a more insular conversation. You really have to work at introducing debate and thought into that conversation. But when it comes to campaigns or, I was at a very lowly level in the White House, but, I'm sure you can speak more to that. I mean, there's a whole process in place that is meant to facilitate debate, and not just about the policy and the argumentation, about the policy itself and then the arguments you're going to use to advance it, but also factual issues. I mean, the vetting process for these speeches, and of course the White House is like the Super Bowl of that. I mean, you'll have 20 people looking at a draft, all from various lenses, and then there's this very robust editing and process and debate about the policy issues. It usually gets worked out, right, in these drafts a lot of times, and the factual issues and what you can say and what's ethical to say and what we're not going to argue. So I've found some environments where you need to do a little bit more to bring that debate and that competing perspectives in, just because it's more insular. But I've never been a part of a writing process that hasn't had a whole bunch of debate attached to it.
For better and for worse.
Yes, everyone has an opinion about the opinions.
Is that familiar with your experience?
Yeah, so I guess I would just say, and I want to clarify, I've never written for Barack Obama. I wrote for Bill Clinton. I would love to be able to say I've written for Barack Obama too, but I have not, so let the record be.
It's very ethical.
Yeah,
That's very good, very good, very on
not-
brand. That's
not
very
take
good.
credit.
Very on brand this morning.
But I guess just what I would say, thinking about, it's the speechwriter's job to make sure there's debate. I mean, in the White House context, the presumption was, as a member of, in my case, the Clinton administration sort of team, we were trying to represent the president's policy. So what we were debating was not, whether or not he was, let's pick something that actually was controversial, whether or not he was for NAFTA. I mean, there was a debate about that, but once he was for NAFTA, then the debate is, how are we going to make the best argument? Again, like choosing the right facts, the most, making sure the facts are honest. And I choose NAFTA in a way because that was actually something that was controversial in the Democratic Party at the time, and for him to decide that's what he was going to be for. But that was a debate that at some level was happening above, the speechwriter's pay grade, or in different rooms. But then the speechwriters needed to be very much part of the conversation of, okay, knowing how fraught this was, actually for Democrats, how do we make this argument in a way that will be compelling? And one of my colleagues in the White House, Michael Waldman, who wrote a wonderful book called POTUS Speaks, he was the chief domestic speechwriter for a long time during the Clinton years. And he had come to the White House, he had been working with Ralph Nader. He was anti-NAFTA, when he came into the administration, and found himself in this position of having to, work with an administration that ultimately was going to support, this trade agreement that had been negotiated by the Bush administration before us. And Michael wrote in his book that, he used to joke, he and others who felt like him, NAFTA because we have to. That was sort of how they felt about it coming into it. And yes, there is an element of NAFTA because you have to, because you've made it. This is your job. Your job is to represent the policy. But what he said was that over time, he actually, not just like, drank the Kool-Aid, but actually became convinced by the arguments. And again, I think part of the thing about debate, and one of the wonderful things about being a speechwriter, when you're getting to do it at a high level or for any client that you care about, what a high level means is, can be a subjective sort of thing, is both that you are trying to, as a speechwriter, bring your own ideas, your own life experience, your own perspective to help sort of widen your client's mind. I mean, I bet Lindsay is a woman, in our profession there aren't as many women as men. That's something that I'm often very conscious of. But also that your own mind. You know, you are forced to consider lots of different perspectives as you were trying to think about how to make this argument in the best way. And so again, thinking about just, you know, for young people who might be considering a career, why is it a rewarding career? I think it's like, we joke at our firm, it's like being in graduate school all the time, if that's something that sounds appealing to you. but it is, you know, you're always learning. You're always being forced to challenge your own assumptions and to think about things in new ways and to think about how to make something that might not initially have seemed interesting to make it seem interesting. So.
What do you think, David?
Well, your wonderful book, which you will all buy, great for weddings, bar mitzvahs.
Especially bar mitzvahs, really. It's just.
In the chapter I wrote for Peter's book, I study Michael Gerson's speechwriting in the Bush administration, and he wrote the speeches justifying the invasion of Iraq. And the research that I conducted suggested that the administration did not engage in argumentation and debate about whether it would be a good choice to invade. Rather, they were cherry-picking evidence that then Gerson slipped into the speeches that George Bush then would read. And so that is an illustration, in my judgment, of the failure of a speechwriter to seek out information that would have been useful for decision makers before they launched what was, by all accounts, a disastrous invasion.
But in your chapter, you also use an example, use a counterexample as well, as I recall.
Right. So Michael Gerson worked with George Bush to articulate why American policy should include an anti-AIDS drug. And so Gerson wrote the speeches that George Bush would deliver justifying that policy. So in that case, Gerson did a great job, but he truly did fail to create a culture of argument before the invasion of Iraq.
Well, this is interesting because I was actually at the White House not long after 9/11. That is actually how I got my start in speechwriting, and I highly recommend it. You know, the White House there's no better place, I think, to be trained in just the high stakes and how much things have to be right and the impact. And speechwriters, above all, really do, you know, care and are concerned about the impact of what we do. If we didn't think that rhetorical leadership was important, if we didn't think that words mattered to history, we wouldn't do this job, right? So, you know, when you devote your life to that, you know, you consider these things very carefully, and they are of the utmost importance to you. But what I would say is I think anyone in the academic field, and I have an interesting background because I actually straddled both. I've taught at the college level for, you know, over a dozen years. I have a PhD. I studied this stuff in depth. My PhD is not, you know, really even on speech writing. It's about kind of gender and politics and how we talk about all of that and power. So I'm well ensconced in this debate about speechwriters. But I always caution academics that, you know, when you're studying writers, one of the things that you have to understand is that there's another ethical consideration, which is that you will never really get the whole story, especially from public reports, because, and this goes to, you know, you saying, I'm not going to talk about who my clients are. Speechwriters, in many ways, have this real need for anonymity. They respect the back and forth with the principal. They don't talk about it often very publicly. And I think this has gotten confusing because you're starting to see more and more people when they come out, they'll write a book, they'll do articles, and they kind of pick and choose little things which makes you, to talk about, which makes you think that you're getting the full story. But, you know, I would say I've worked very closely with several of the writers that you were talking about, and I have always found them actually to be very thoughtful, considerate, exceptional people, and I think there was a lot more debate. I think that is not necessarily available to us now, but I think as the history evolves. But speech writing is how a speech comes to be when you come at it from an academic perspective and you try to see that process, right? The intellectual engagement, the arguments behind the scenes, the choices that are made, the debate about factual information. You're given information from, you know, from NSC, and you're given information from state, and it doesn't match up. And how do you figure out what is the right information to use or the best information to use? You know, those are things that weigh very heavily on people in this profession, but they are also the subject of a lot of debate that doesn't necessarily make its way out into the world. I actually studied in my master's degree, I wanted to go back and look at Ted Sorensen and John F. Kennedy's policy about how they were trying to kind of restrict the press from talking about a lot of the more nationally significant details in terms of national security with the Bay of Pigs invasion and the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I went up and I went into the archives and I looked at all this stuff, and lo and behold, there's some materials in there with the handwriting. It's very cool if you actually get it, if you're a speechwriting geek, right? There's John, if you have to put on the gloves and take out the piece of paper and you're touching history through the gloves, and but there's the writing and on the side, Kennedy and Sorensen, and you can see some of that process take place. But that is where it's memorialized, is in the draft. And there's a lot of it that you will not be able to capture without a willing speechwriter to show up and tell you everything that was discussed. And in a lot of ways, that violates the code of speechwriters, which is, this was started in the 1950s with the Brownlow report, and that, specifically singling out speechwriters in a profession as having a passion for anonymity was a part of the job. It starts with Raymond Moley taking the draft and throwing it at the fireplace and saying to FDR, "This is your draft now," right? So there's in the new media age where people are coming forward and writing books and writing articles and being kind of more, divulging more about their careers, we can be lulled into this sense that we really know everything that's gone on behind the scenes. And I would just caution any kind of academic, take on that and any ethical failings that you want to kind of ascribe to speechwriters. It has to be done with the humility that you don't know everything that happened in the room.
What do you think, Vinca?
I completely agree, and I was not there for this, and I don't want to, I don't have a sense of what Mike Gerson's, real sort of realm of authority was as chief speechwriter, but it seems to me just, completely unfair to pin the blame on him for, if knowing everything we know now, I think a lot of us feel very differently, or maybe felt that, a lot of us felt differently at the time too, but maybe a lot more people now also feel differently about how we got into that war. But to say that it was Mike Gerson's responsibility and failure when you had, George Tenet at the CIA, when you had you had Colin Powell, when you had the entire people with years and years of the highest level experience, the highest level security clearances, seeing all the information that I doubt Michael Gerson was seeing, that it should have been his responsibility to determine what was true, what was not, what was enough information and what was insufficient information. And even had he felt some qualms about it, which, as Lindsay says, we don't know, we don't know exactly how he was feeling as he wrote those words, I have full confidence he was doing the best he could. And I really believe that he was doing the best he could.
And I think the danger is the flip side of that. I would not give Mike Gerson total credit for what is really been one of the unbelievable pieces of the Bush legacy, which is the initiative on AIDS in Africa. At PEPFAR and everything they did in the State Department, which frankly the Bush administration, a lot of the people who left there have continued very quietly continuing to do that work. And and one of the things, they don't seek a lot of attention for it, but one of the things that they have done is taken the infrastructure that they created to try to help end the AIDS epidemic in Africa, and they've now used it to provide a lot of very necessary health care, like mammograms and cervical cancer screenings for women across Africa. And they're using that same infrastructure. That is very much a Bush priority. It is not just, I believe Mike Gerson also felt passionately about it, but there's a very interesting piece written by Matthew Scully, who was a writer in that administration, and it's called Present at the Creation. It ran in the Atlantic after the administration. And at the time, it came out as like this indictment of Mike Gerson and kind of being the conscience of the administration. But I don't think that's what Matthew intended it to be. I think what Matthew was trying to say is this is the danger. The danger because by the way, it isn't just Mike Gerson.
Right.
There was a whole team of 8 to 10 people who were writing for the president and the vice president at that time. And so, I think that this is the danger when one person becomes kind of the media wants to do that, right? They want to write that story. They want to write the story about the one guy, toiling away in a Starbucks, like, coming up with all these ideas for history. And the truth is, it's usually a lot messier and a lot more hands on deck than that. And by the way, the biggest hand on deck is the principal themselves. It's a good speechwriting relationship should be a collaboration. And that's one of the things I would say is the biggest ethical concern, frankly. If I have somebody call me up and say, you know, I want you to write a speech for me, but I don't want to meet with you, and I don't really want to talk with you, and, you know, just tell me what to say, or make me sound like that, you know, I won't take that job, because that is unethical, I believe.
So I want to move into that. There's a lot to be unpacked about how speechwriting works and those kinds of conversations. But let's talk about for whom you choose to work, right? If you're in the White House, it's pretty straightforward. The guy's name is on the door, and everybody I've written for is quick to remind me that they are the best writer on staff, and it's just an inconvenience. They have to pay the rest of us. Who do you choose to not work for? When do you say no thanks? And I asked my students in my ethics class yesterday if they had any questions they wanted me to ask, and one of them was about specifically the Democratic candidates. Right, it was hammer and tong up until South Carolina. Now suddenly everybody loves Joe Biden. I mean, at what point as a speechwriter do you say, you know what, actually, you know, no, I can't be in this? Or you know, it's obvious, it's a team sport, right? Writing for a principal is a team sport. But at what point do you, as an individual, say, I can't write this policy. I'll write for you, Mr. President or Senator, but I can't write this policy. Or you know what, you've wandered too far off from where I thought you were. Or how do you do that? How do you choose to not work for? How do you choose who to not work for?
Well, it seems, I feel like your question is actually two different things a little bit, because the first part, so how do you choose who to not work for is one thing, but once you've chosen who you're going to work for, you don't get to say, I'll write about this, but I won't write about that. So, I mean, I think once you have signed on, you've said, you know, okay, I'm with you, I'm supporting your campaign or your administration or your whatever, your Senate office. Then you're on board, and you have the right and, you know, hopefully the authority, the opportunities, the obligation, and then the personal moral compass, you know, to try and make the arguments, to try and help others if you disagree about something, to get your ideas into debate and to try and prevail. But it's, you know, thinking about the speechwriter, it's not your speech. Your job is to be representing their ideas, their policy. So it is. So on that side, you know, if you finally decide, look, I just feel so strongly about this that you are wrong, and I can no longer keep arguing your point of view on this, then that's on you to resign. Choosing who to work for in the first place. So I have actually myself, I've never worked on a campaign, as it happens. But thinking about, you know, we've now had several campaigns in a row on both sides of the aisle where you've had lots and lots of candidates in the primary, and then campaign staffs, as one campaign sort of withers on the vine, the staff, you know, they put out on Twitter, I'm available, and they hop to the next one, even if just the week before they were putting together the talking points, you know, against their former opponent. But I do think that the primary process is this sort of winnowing down until the two parties come up with, okay, who is our contender going to be? And at that point, you know, at that point, then it does kind of come down to, and I think especially in these hyper-partisan and polarized times, you know, what you were seeing very much on the Democratic side, my side, is, you know, this is about defeating a second Trump administration. And so at that point, then, I think people are making the decision, well, just how important is that goal to me, and will I throw my talent, my energy, my time, whatever I've got behind whoever is taking on that fight. So yeah, I think there are different considerations.
So what do you, from your, you know, you watched the last presidential campaign. I don't know if you're involved with it or not, but it was obviously a whole lot of candidates, hammer and tong. Then everybody rallies around a guy. What do you think?
Well, I think, you know, when you're doing campaign writing, right? Look, any principal that I work for, I kind of have around an 85% rule, right? If I wanted to agree with the person I write for all the time, I would run myself. Right, that's the only way to get 100% agreement, because I always feel like I'm right. So, right, yeah, I mean, if you want that, then you should run, and I would encourage you to run. I mean, we need really good public servants. That's important, and I think we have a lot of people now who are, I want to be behind the scenes. No, please get up on the podium. Like, we will be right behind you, writing what you need, but we need good public servants. So. You know, I aim for 85%. The 15% can't be a deal breaker. It can't be an issue where, you know, I just feel it is, you know, completely, you know, antithetical to my beliefs or my moral compass. You know, and I think the thing about primaries is you're really arguing in the 15%. right? I mean, that's the thing is you look at people and you say, well, I worked for Bernie. I agree with Bernie 95%. And then you go, well, all right, Biden, I agree with him about 80, 85, I'll hop over. And so I think, I think it's the primaries are meant to really emphasize that really small area of disagreement. And sometimes those can be deeply philosophical, but in terms of the outcome and policy, the outcome and policy looks different, and it certainly is a stark contrast to the other party. And so you think, well, I definitely don't agree with that guy, right? If you have two options and you're gonna work in a cycle, then that's what you do. I did not work the 2016 cycle. I had made a decision after 2012. I had done 2 presidential campaigns, and I felt like it was important, and I think this is good advice for writers generally. If you're writing to public audiences, politics is wonderful, government is wonderful, being a writer is amazing, it's the best job, don't let anybody tell you different. But there is a danger of becoming ensconced in a vocabulary and in a series of arguments that can be very limiting. You're in a bubble in a lot of ways. And I felt like after 2012, obviously we weren't winning. And I didn't think that was my fault necessarily. It wasn't me alone. I can't win it and I can't lose it. But I did think I was starting to get to the point where I wondered if the way in which I was approaching these issues and the lens through which I was seeing them I wasn't contributing what I could. And so I decided to step back from 2016. I was called at a certain point and by a former colleague who said, I know you said you're out, but I have this guy and I can't tell you who it is, but in 2 weeks he's going to announce for president and he needs a speechwriter. And I said, oh. And he said, you can't tell me who it is. He said, no, but it's a businessman from New York. And I said, well, it ain't Bloomberg. So I said, I think I'm good. And I have to say, and I wrote a piece about this on Election Day in 2016. It's on the Huffington Post, where I was very clear about, my concerns about this administration. I view that as my insurance piece because I will never get a phone call from the White House asking me to serve, so I will never have to deal with that very difficult ethical conundrum. But I also have friends who do serve in the White House, and I think that's a very difficult duty to sign up for. If you're a good person and you believe that you can be on the front lines and make it better. I bless you for trying. I really, I think we need to appreciate that and appreciate people who are trying in very difficult circumstances to create good public discourse, even if the outcome is not always what we would like it to be.
So I want to move to the audience in a second, but any last thoughts as we set up the mic for audience questions? David, any thoughts? No? As we set up the mic for audience questions? So just line up, I guess, behind the mic, and a lot of undergraduates and graduate students who are looking at careers in speechwriting, a lot of people, political professionals. What questions do you have?
This is going to be a long back half then.
All right. All right. So hello.
Hi.
My name's Andre. I'm a senior here at SMPA studying political communication. My question is, so during times when your principal's emotions might be high, terrorist attack, gun, violence, whatever it may be, as a speechwriter, how do you ensure that your principal's emotions don't get in the way of their ethical, I guess, duty to console the, community, nation, whatever it may be?
I think this is a therapist piece you're talking about, I think. How do you do that?
So I guess what I would say, I feel like maybe there's a little bit of a subtext here, which is sort of the risk that at a moment of heightened emotions, you might there might be a temptation to do something sort of reactive without having sort of thought everything through. And again, I think there it's more than just the speechwriter. So with there will be a lot of people, I think, coming around that table or in that crucible where where the words are being forged, where the policy or the response is being forged. I actually want to think about the other piece of it, which is just this question of emotion. And I think, you know, in modern memory, I think some of the most powerful moments of presidential rhetoric that we've seen have actually been moments of heightened emotion. I don't think it's bad for emotion to show. And sometimes I actually think it's important. I mean, I find, not so much, you know, when I think about my White House days, but when I think about clients I work with just in general, oftentimes one of the challenges is to sort of encourage people to let their humanity show. This is one of the things we're always trying to say is, you know, be a real person, let your humanity show. Because that is how you connect with an audience. So, so I have never, in my experience, and you know, I was not I was not there after 9/11. I was not in some of the, you know, the war rooms that we might think about. But I feel like emotion. Again, emotion is actually a positive thing for a leader to be able to manifest. And so when I think about in the Clinton years, I didn't have a hand in writing these remarks, but I remember them so vividly after the Oklahoma City bombing. You know, and that was when President Clinton sort of got the sobriquet of mourner-in-chief. But to be able to do that, actually, to be able to channel the grief of a nation, of a community, and then of a nation, and to help us sort of, you know, to articulate that grief, to try and make sense of something that made no sense, or you can think about Obama after Newtown, you know, to take something that makes no sense, to try and hold that, to weep, you know, as we all did, and then to say, and here's what I think we should do. Then, of course, you also see the limits of presidential power. You know, here's what I think we should do, and to try and get us to do it.
David, I think, as I recall, there's a piece about President Reagan's tear down this wall speech that speaks to this exactly. I forget who wrote the piece, but as I recall, they drew on Richard Weaver and his fundamental argument from foundational terms. And the speechwriters were saying, no, Mr. President, you've got to back off. This is a really delicate moment of the Cold War. You've got to be cautious. And President Reagan said, no, this matters. This is about freedom, and completely overruled his speechwriters and did what you just said, which is really grasped sort of a call to freedom that resonated with the people of West Berlin, and that resonated with the West, and ultimately resonated with the people of East Berlin and the Soviets. I mean, as a scholar of rhetoric, what is the power of, are there examples, or can you talk about the power of capturing emotion in a way that really makes sense of a Newtown or an Oklahoma City, or, you know, the last days of an empire, or whatever that is?
And again, as academic, we can sit in our offices and not have to endure the crises. We can look at it neutrally. In the wake of 9/11, America was traumatized. And so Michael Gerson was an American, and he was traumatized as well. I, at the same time, think that although we shouldn't pin sole responsibility on him for the debacle that was Iraq, he was chief of staff of the speechwriting unit. George Bush called him the person that thought like him and offered him the key words. And Gerson was the one that mastered the key metaphor that was used by the Bush administration to justify the invasion. We don't want a smoking gun to become a mushroom cloud. And it was a very persuasive metaphor that was used to persuade Americans in Congress that the invasion was right. And so, again, I do not know as an academic, and I take your caution to heart. I was not there. I did not see Gerson or what he argued, but from all the reports that I have seen, and again, based upon a Senate intelligence report that was very thorough of the decision-making that evolved and unfolded during the considerations that Bush was taking to invade Iraq, there were very few situations or contexts in which argumentation took place. You know better. So
well, I guess my question would be, have you interviewed any of the writers from
no,
that? Okay.
I have not.
So one of the things that I would just say, and then I'm sorry, and we'll get back to your question, but one of the things that I would say is that we have to remember that press reports and other reports and biographies are rhetoric too. And they also need a critical rhetorical lens. You know, you have to understand that, you know, a news article, especially in these days, right, we have so many anonymous sources floating around. My experience with being on the inside of things that wind up in the paper or online is that the person who's the anonymous source has a very strong opinion that they are trying to advance by characterizing the narrative in that way. And so, look, but it's a reasonable conversation to have about argumentation and the role that it plays in all of this. I think, though, to cast ethical judgments on matters of historical fact is another matter, and to question the motives and frankly the ethics of people who are involved in creating that discourse. I would talk to them, and I've actually found Matthew Scully, John McConnell, David Frum, Mike Gerson have been, Pete Wehner, all of those guys, from that period of time, I don't think I'm leaving anyone out, they have been very willing actually to talk with academics about that. As a matter of fact, that's one of the first ways I got to know them, was I was a graduate student, intern, sitting outside of there as the world's oldest living intern. If it's the right job, take it, even if you have to work for free. But, I was a 25-year-old graduate school intern, sitting outside their offices and asking them questions about because at that point I was studying it and I wanted to understand how it works. And I think that there's too little of that, and that's one of the things that I think, and congratulations again on the 1-year anniversary. This is pretty exceptional, but I think the more that we get the conversation between academics who study this and the speechwriters who practice, the better the outcome's going to be for everybody. So I think this kind of dialogue is really important, and I would say I think, I'll introduce you. You should chat.
Well, we did try.
We try. Well, I have to say, I come from that world. I spent 25 years on your side before coming to this side, and I was the chief of staff during Clinton's impeachment, and I was a professor during Trump's impeachment. The view is different from SMPA than it is from the Longworth building. Please.
The question about emotion, I would just like to echo what you said. I think there's actually a lot of times where we struggle having principals show that level of emotion because everything is so kind of tightly controlled, and there's this concern about, you don't want to gaffe, you don't want to mess things up. I don't know if the Trump era has blown that up as much as people think. I still think he plays by one set of rules and everybody else still kind of plays by the other set of rules. But they're so controlled, right, and so cautious about everything that they say, and could you take 5 seconds of that and turn an ad spot into it, that there's very little room for spontaneity. And so I actually find they know who they are, they know what they believe, and that's consistent. And in moments where their emotions are heightened, it doesn't lead them down the path of saying or doing something that is unwise or not thoughtful. It actually leads them to the best parts of themselves. So some of the speeches that I have enjoyed the most are actually what people would typically write off as ceremonial discourse, eulogies, right? Moments of crisis. So when one of my first speechwriting jobs was with Ted Stevens, who's in the U.S. Senate. He was a senator from Alaska, and he was also the president pro tempore, which really in the Senate, right, is a job that's largely about speech making. And he was called upon after Ronald Reagan died to give one of 3 speeches that would be internationally televised in the rotunda. And we had less than 72 hours to put it together. And so fortunately, and that was a great example of where we were really able to work together. He had been the Republican whip when Reagan was in office. He really admired Reagan. He saw Reagan as, in some ways almost kind of a bit of a father figure or a mentor. But I had the history. I had read, because I had been a master's degree student, I had read a ton of Reagan speeches, a ton of stuff, around the Cold War. And so we brought those 2 things together and were able to write something. And he didn't show emotion very often. He was a World War II vet. He was like a hardened kind of guy. He was known to have the worst temper in the United States Senate. He was
That's
voted
saying
that.
A lot.
Yep, he was voted that in Washingtonian several years in a row, and he was disappointed when he lost. He was a tough guy, but you could see he felt that, And by the way, that's part of the reason that process, and we haven't talked a lot about that, but process is so important because that back and forth with the principal, you want when they get up to deliver that speech to feel like they own it. It says you've helped them refine what they want to say, but it is theirs. And as a speechwriter, you have to step back and say, it is theirs. It is not mine. You should not be taking credit for little words right here and there, little phrases. So that is theirs. That you've done your piece of it. They've given up and they've given it. It isn't a speech until they give it, right? So it is theirs. And I think, if they feel that way, and that it becomes this nice moment where there's a release of that emotion and they're able to share their feelings, but they're able to do it in a way that they feel comfortable with publicly. The other one that was actually, again, very sad, but there was a shooting during the 2012 campaign. And of course, we're in this weird spot because Mitt Romney was not the president. I mean, he shouldn't be getting up and speaking on behalf of the nation, and yet you should say something, right? And so we put something together that morning, and within like 3 hours of finding out about the shooting, he was out and he was talking about it. And one of the things that I liked about that speech, I didn't like the circumstance, obviously, but I liked that you got a real sense of Mitt Romney as a human being. And afterwards, when the Netflix documentary came out, a lot of people said, oh, wow, I wish I'd seen more of that guy, the behind the scenes. And I thought, that means we failed, because if you didn't get to know that person, I mean, that's what this should all be about. And I think the closest expression that I saw was when he voted with his speech on the vote on impeachment a couple weeks ago. And it's just all of that other stuff fell away, and it's just him being him. The policy is consistent, his beliefs are consistent, that's who he is, but there's a lot of emotion that is guiding him, and you can tell he feels it heavily, and because of that, I think it enhances the speaker credibility in the argument.
Please.
I'm Carlos Shuriardi. I was a political appointee in the Department of Justice in the Obama administration. And Lindsay, I wanted to go back to something you were talking about around the ethics of kind of being a good person in government and pushing for what you think is right and trying to make a better argument versus recognizing maybe that you're in a difficult situation and you disagree with the broader efforts of the government or the administration. And that's something that, as a lawyer, my friends and I talk a lot about in the current environment. And I'm just wondering if you can maybe unpack a little bit of, for all of you, the ethical issues for a speechwriter in that context.
Good question.
I would think actually, so it is a very, I think we all think about this now actually with, I mean, every administration is going to make choices that sometimes even I think it was in the Clinton years, although I'm forgetting, maybe it was the Bush years, in the early days of the war in Bosnia, some people that I knew, I guess I was still at the Helsinki Commission, resigned sort of in protest to what the administration wasn't doing actually at the time. So people are gonna face choices. I think for a speechwriter, maybe you face that question more viscerally just because you're having to help make the arguments. Although I'm not a lawyer, I'm not at DOJ, so maybe actually as a DOJ lawyer you feel the same way, right? You're defending postures that you don't agree with. I would imagine right now for civil servants, so distinct from a political appointee who might be a good person who goes in and then just feels like I can't take it anymore, I'm going to get out again. But a civil servant, I think it's incredibly challenging because one of the terrible things we're seeing now, and my background is foreign policy, just the hollowing out of the State Department. So the damage that is being done, in this 4-year period is actually going to be with us for a generation because we are losing all of this institutional knowledge, people taking early retirement or people who were earlier in their careers who were like, this is not for me. And I worry about that, and I can only imagine how challenging that would be for, say, a DOJ lawyer to try and build, or people at EPA or wherever. Do I just try to hunker down and stick it out? Because if I leave now, you hollow out the institutions of our democracy as well.
Yeah, you hollow it out, and also, who replaces you, right? I mean, this is kind of part of that conversation that you were having about wanting there to be, right, these kind of, this discussion and this kind of argument and having this full-fledged debate. And if there's nobody there that disagrees, that debate doesn't happen. And I think, to be honest with you, that's part of the rationale among a lot of people who are serving as political appointees right now, which is, I may not be able to guide this towards where I think it necessarily needs to be. And to be fair to those people, they may actually support the policy. They just do not like the way in which it's being contextualized. Words matter, rhetorical leadership matters, or there are certain aspects of it that they find really troubling. And, I think the question is, if all of those people leave, we have a hollowing out of institutions, and or we wind up with people who replace them who just kind of, don't offer a competing perspective, and we've lost the ability of the agencies in the political appointee level to really be a crucible for debate about what are the right policies for the country.
Can I ask you a question about the reasons why you decided not to write for that wealthy businessman? Because your choice meant that Stephen Miller ended up as writing the key speeches. And
Well,
so
that's not how that, I think Stephen Miller was going to do that whether I was around. I mean,
that could be.
one of the things that's interesting about Stephen Miller is that, and I try not to talk too specifically about individuals, but I think one of the things that's interesting about Stephen Miller is the kind of role in which he carved out for himself. He was actually kind of the hype guy. He would show up and give these speeches at the rallies before Trump would come out, and then he was writing, so I mean, it's kind of like an event brought to you by, produced by, directed by, acted by Stephen Miller. I've never really seen that before. I think that's a really, in a lot of ways, I think Stephen Miller has kind of reshaped the, kind of the impact or the relationship between principal and writer. If I had thought that I could do something positive, I would have done that. I don't think that my impulses, my writing style, my process, I'm a big process person. I think process is one of the best ways to ensure ethical communication. To make sure that there is a fact-checking process that is strictly adhered to make sure that there is debate and deliberation on the front end and at every single table read and draft, to make sure that there is delivery prep, because if you get it wrong, it has international implications, right? It's very clear to me that I would not have fit in well in that environment.
I want 2 more questions, and then we'll call it.
Hi, my name is Nicole. I'm a sophomore here and an SMPA hopeful. The resounding theme in a lot of SMPA classes is if you disagree with an administration or your principal, that you should resign. I've heard that in many a class, and it's stated very clearly. I was wondering, you've talked a little bit about this at several points here today, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about if you already work in an administration and you start to begin to really disagree with the direction things are leading in, how do you decide if it's more ethical to resign or to stay on, be that person who offers the counter perspective or debate?
Great question.
So I think, I'm taken with Lindsay sort of 85%, 15%. I think in my own actual experience, it was more like, honestly, 95-5, And when I think about the moment, what might you disagree with to the point that you felt you could no longer stay? There are issues and there are issues. And I think for each of us, we're gonna know what those lines are that we just can't cross when we just feel like, okay, I cannot make this argument, or I simply cannot be associated. I can't live with myself if I am associated with an administration that is doing this or that. So I think that's something that you know for yourself. I'm sorry, I'm losing the thread of my own argument a little bit. So why don't you pick up? I'll
No, I
come
think
back.
I think that's there are issues and there are issues. I like that. Yeah, I think look, I've been in I've worked for a lot of people and been in a lot of environments. There have been some environments. I was on one campaign where there was a conversation. There was an ad that ultimately wound up becoming, I think, Washington Post or something, declared it the worst lie of that campaign cycle, which was this ad. And I can remember when the ad was in production, people from another part of the organization came in and said, we're going to run this ad, so we need this in the speech. And so I did some digging and I looked at the numbers and I came to much the same conclusion that the Washington Post did, which was, and I said, walk me through this argument again. So you're using this statistic, and then walk me through the reasoning, how we're getting to this claim, right? So you've got this piece of evidence, and right, this is the argumentation, right? Toolman model, right? Draw me the
Name
connection.
checking Stephen Toolman.
Yeah,
Well done.
Thank
Well
you.
done.
Thank you. And so, right? It's like, here's your claim, here's your evidence. Can you walk me through your reasoning, right? And what's your backing? And it was like, it couldn't be done. You would have to do mental gymnastics to get there. And I said, we can't put that in this. If we put this in this speech, we're immediately going to get, 4 Pinocchios in the Washington Post with Glenn Kessler. And people, no, it should go in, and it's this whole core. And I just said, well, if you want it, then you guys can put it in edits, but we're not going to do it. And I don't mean to, position myself as like the arbiter of what is right and good, but I just thought it doesn't make any sense. I can't in good conscience advise that a principal would get up and say this knowing that the inevitable fallout is going to be that nothing in the speech is going to matter, because that one fact will get pulled out and it will become the story, and then that's what we're going to be talking about.
What do you tell your students? Oh, I'm sorry, Vinca.
I'm sorry, I just remembered the second half of what I was going to say, which was just to remind us all, though, that I do think right now we are living in very strange times, and having the conversation. So even the idea of feeling like, okay, I don't agree with this administration, but if I resign, it's like, but for me, like I am the last. That's not normal. So like we're talking about that now because I do think that is how some people feel now, but that is not normal. It wasn't like that for, or for me, or ever. So, and I hope it will not be like that again.
I don't think that that's going to be, the decision to resign or to not resign. That if you are, that is a very rare thing to have happen in your career. Now, I will say, if you want to go into speechwriting and you are concerned about the ethics, or you want to go in really to any profession and you're concerned about ethics, you should save money. And I don't mean that, flippantly. You need to have if you're working on a campaign and you decide partway through and you're at a level where they've announced you and you're part of the senior team and the press knows who you are, and you decide that you are going to resign, they will write about it. It will be a big deal. People will ask questions about it, and so you need to have enough money to be able to kind of take some time. I mean, you don't know how that's going to land. You may ethically feel like that is the important thing to do. And that's fine, but just make sure that you're in a financial position to do that. And I don't think people talk about that very often, that, look, we don't get paid a ton of money. I mean, if you're working on a campaign staff, it's, like a small check and like whatever's left over from catering at the end of the day is your compensation. But if you know that you have a strong ethical and moral compass, and you know that there are certain things that as a communicator you feel you could just not abide, you could not work or do those things, then if you ever are confronted with that, you never want the question to be, well, how am I going to pay my rent if I go with my conscience, right? So I do think this is rare. I think, I've been in a lot of circumstances where I've had to say, how far am I going to go? What hill am I going to die on, right? Am I going to write it, or am I going to accept that it's probably going to get added in edits, but I'm not going to be a part of it, right? I mean, that kind of stuff. I've only had really one circumstance where I've ever thought to myself, gee, do I need to leave? And as a matter of fact, the biggest one was probably this last cycle, where I had already decided to sit out, but it just was very clear to me that I wouldn't be able to work in that environment.
What do you tell your students, David?
Well, I will say that you have been successful here at George Washington in having a student pose that question, because she was saying that she is told by professors that you can pose the question, should I resign? And that's an ethical question. And then the second point I heard her say too is that there's a need for a speechwriter to do his or her due diligence. And that means a period where ideas and evidence are in contest, they're argued about. And so that's essentially what I try to do, but you're doing it much better here.
Last question, Blake, fresh off one of those campaigns.
Thank you guys so much for being here. Really appreciate it. My question, I guess I'll float it in context. Not a matter of life or death, or resigning or not resigning, but when we're looking at these campaigns historically with earned media and crowd sizes and different sorts of things, coming from Iowa and then to those what we call like the marathon states, it's kind of an open secret that campaigns will do whatever it is they have to make a room look full, to count every single person in the room, even the media, if they have to. And I know in Iowa there was kind of a little bit of a tug of war, and of course I'll say it was started by another campaign, where they started saying that they were having, like 2,400 people at an event, so we'd have to get someone to say that we had 2,500 people at an event. And by the end of the campaign, I looked at the last rally that we had, and I'll probably get in trouble for saying this. This is broadcast anywhere. But in Des Moines, and it was like it looked like a maze, like the way that it had been sort of set up to almost like the rallies were starting to look like optical illusions to make a crowd in a very small place with a very small population look huge. And then moving on to these later states, seeing with earned media, the idea is you're supposed to put, as the Hillary organizer for the state of Tennessee told me from the last time, it's kind of like Field, the musical. You're supposed to make it look like you're running a field operation. Don't have several canvas launches, have one, have everyone come there. It doesn't even matter if they canvas, as long as, the Tennessean thinks they're canvassing. So I know it's not a Buttigieg campaign thing, and it's not a Sanders campaign thing or a Hillary thing, but when obviously the people who do this, think that they're doing the right thing because they care about their candidate. They want their candidate to win. It's not something sinister like, the quest for power and some hungry thing. It's, we have to beat Bernie Sanders, or, we have to beat Pete Buttigieg, or we have to beat Hillary Clinton. So my question is, have you ever, in your experience, told a lie? And is it ever okay to lie?
To the best of my knowledge, so in my professional experience, to the best of my knowledge, I have never lied, and I do not think it's okay to lie.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I have a 5-year-old, so we're dealing at that level of, right? I mean, look, I would actually like to go to the root of your question, which is the entire setup that we have for how we choose the president of the United States. I mean, there is something seriously wrong when it's high stakes, whether you have 2,500 or Bernie has 2,600, because I got news for you, your ability to create an optical event, right, to create good optics in Iowa has zero to do with running the United States of America. And, when I went into the voting booth in 2016, so I had written that I was not going to vote for the Republican nominee for the first time in many, many years, which a lot of people took to assume that I was going to vote for Hillary, but was not actually the case. I wrote someone in. And I can't tell you how freeing it was to sit in the voting booth, move all this other stuff aside, and I have had the privilege of getting to know a lot of really wonderful, very capable public servants who could be president. They could do a great job. And ask myself, who would I pick? Who would I pick? Not because of their crowd size, not because of who do I think is really, really good, that would be great for the country and great for my son and great for the conversation that we're having and create good policy, not policy we're all going to necessarily agree on, but would be doing it in their, trying to do what's in the best interest for the most people. And I picked somebody, and I walked out, and I told my husband going in, I think I'm going to write this person in. And I got back in the car and I said, who'd you vote for? And he said, I voted for him too. So he wrote in the same person. And I said, the really sad thing is the way we run our elections these days, he could never win. He's exceptional, but he could never be president because the gauntlet we make people run through has so very little to do with, and you get to see a piece of it, right? I mean, I think Pete Buttigieg, a lot of us who watch the debates, right? I mean, that is, at least there you're getting to see a real conversation. They're talking about their positions on issues. You're getting to see some authenticity. But crowd size, really? I mean, this is, I can create a crowd. You want me to go, you and I could probably figure out how to do that right now, right on this campus, this afternoon. We should start a farm. No, but but
He's fresh off a campaign.
So, well, there you go. All right, well, come see me after it. It can be bipartisan. So that really doesn't have much to do with anything about the country or what's going to be good policy or it's just people in a room. It's people in a room who maybe don't even live in that state. It's people in a room who probably like secretly, if the articles about the Bloomberg campaign are to be believed, it's like, oh, I was actually canvassing for Bernie while I was standing in a room for Bloomberg. So I think the deeper question there is participating in all of this. And I think, one of the things I love about this school and I love about this project is that it's not just bringing speechwriters, but right, you guys are also serving the conversation about media and journalism and, and public service, the nexus of all of those things. And I think there is a bit of a conversation that we need to have, for all the lamenting about 2016 and we really didn't vet Trump and we really, and we gave him all this free airtime, and there were times where Trump wouldn't even be speaking. It would just be like a Trump podium at the Trump sign, and Ted Cruz or Marco Rubio would be having an actual rally and they'd be speaking and they'd just be covering the empty podium at the Trump rally. For all that conversation, I haven't seen a ton change in the way that we cover political campaigns. And that's not to say all journalists are bad. There are great journalists. But the media narratives, the things, and we're guilty of it too, because we are the ones who consume the media. So if you're trying to get eyeballs, we have to start communicating that what really matters to us, and this is a project that I've been working on a lot over the last several years, we have to communicate that what matters to us is good information. What matters to us is good discussion, good debate, good arguments. It matters to us if people are telling the truth, right? And by the way, you can have a debate about facts, right? I mean, there is some stuff, national security is a great example, where there's actually, you're trying to read intelligence, you're trying to read information. It's not always going to be a perfect read. But, we need to communicate to media and to candidates that stuff matters to us, so that we can actually get to the business of electing people who are really qualified, good public servants that will actually move the country forward. And I think as long as we're, in some ways, there's been this real reckoning on the Republican side of the aisle after Trump, where a lot of people kind of woke up and go, whoa, what happened, And, we, in some ways, we have to be very introspective, and we have to ask ourselves to what degree we welcomed, the tweeting and this and that, because we paid attention to it. We gave it a lot of coverage. And that doesn't necessarily, I think there are other reasons that Trump won that actually have to do with a part of the country that he spoke to that hadn't been spoken to in a long time. But that said, these media events and this, it doesn't really matter. I mean, I'll give you a perfect example. In 2012, Mitt Romney went to Detroit, and we were on the field at the Detroit Lions Stadium, and he was unveiling his economic plan. I mean, it was probably the most important piece of our economic agenda. And it was a mess, because they had put it on, the 25-yard line of the stadium. You had all the press here, and then it was just an empty stadium. And I walked in, and Lanhee Chen and I, who's the policy director on that campaign, walked in there together. We had worked so hard with Mitt on his remarks. Weeks had gone into this. And we walked in and we sat down and we just kind of looked around, and I thought, this is it. No one's going to remember anything about the speech. And sure enough, everything that night was Mitt Romney gives a speech to an empty room, empty stadium, because Obama was filling stadiums. I'm not saying that's not an important piece of information about the kind of support that people can generate, but the idea that you wouldn't focus on anything that was said in a 30-minute economic address in order to talk about the stadium and just show the photo of an empty stadium, that is not the way we ought to be conducting.
Paradoxically, again, thinking about these sort of strange times that we're living in, so now in the age of coronavirus, I mean, we are going to have politicians speaking in empty rooms. And it will be interesting to see, how does the coverage change? How does our experience of it change as listeners when you don't have the energy of the crowd that you're drawing off of, and you have to listen to what they're actually saying? What is that going to be like? So, this sort of forced experiment.
It comes back to the ethic of a good argument.
And again, it goes back to the question of what is a lie. And I think we need to unfold that word and look at it as a spectrum, because there are some felony lies, there are misdemeanor lies, there are parking ticket lies, and a parking ticket lie would be one where you inflate the number of people in a stadium. I think a felony lie would be one that leads a country to war or leads people astray to the degree that they harm themselves. And so those are the questions that I'm sure you are encouraging your students to pose. What are the consequences
Well,
of the words? And
There's a midterm tomorrow, actually. in the class. Before we thank our guests, I want to end with the words of Lee Pelton, president of Emerson College, my alma mater. When his first public statement after taking over, he said that the world is still in want of clear-headed citizens, tempered by historical perspective, disciplined by rational thinking and moral compass, who speak well and write plainly. So that is our charge at SMPA. That is our charge at the Project on Ethics and Political Communication. All three of you are doing your part to make this happen, and in Oregon and with candidates and other people we don't know. And hopefully it's something that all of us watching online and in this room will continue to go forth and do. So thank all of you for joining us, and thank all of you for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.